In 2007, wildfires swept through San Diego County, killing 2 people and destroying 1,300 homes. 2 state agencies blamed the cause of the fires, including the largest, the Witch Creek Fire, on SDG&E's power lines. Now, the power company is asking ratepayers to retroactively cover costs for the Witch Creek and other fires. Joining me is SDG&E spokesperson Stephanie Donovan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So why is SDG&E asking customers through this special mechanism to pay for damages it caused in 2007?
Well, let's go back. If you can remember, I certainly can, in the October of 2007. We certainly do not dispute CAL FIRE's investigation that found that our equipment was the ignition source of 3 of those fires back in 2007. But let's not forget the hot, dry, extremely strong Santa Ana winds. They were a significant factor in not only the ignition source, but also in the terrible spread of the fire that caused so much damage.
But we also know that a report of the Consumer Protection and Safety Division did find that along with Santa Ana wind conditions, it was SDG&E's conductors and it was their opinion that SDG&E was in violation of some of the rules.
Now, you said the right word. It was their opinion, and that was never finding of fact. To date, there has been no finding of fact that SDG&E's actions did anything wrong. So,
does SDG&E think they did anything wrong?
SDG&E realized after the 2007 fires that we could do more, and we have done more in terms of strengthening our system to try to prevent our system's equipment being involved in anything in the future like we saw in 2007. Now, that's 2,500 poles that we have changed out in the backcountry in the high fire risk area, replacing the wood poles with steel poles. We also have used all kinds of technology to try to make sure that we know what's happening with the system and the weather's impact. I find it ironic that some people are saying today that if SDG&E had shut off the power, it could have prevented the Witch Fire. And we have had, as you know, over the past several years, made every attempt to try to do just that, and that was shot down both by the public and by the Commission.
But that goes back to because one of your workers actually had alerted SDG&E to a problem, and SDG&E didn't respond and shut off the power.
Do you know how high the winds were at that time? There were a lot of outages, there were a lot of fires, and I think that if you can't just take a point in time and say that was the crux of the matter. So I really think that we better stick to the facts and not keep repeating claims by others as if they were fact.
So let's go back to the original question then. If SDG&E realizes, in retrospect, it could have done more, why should the ratepayer, in effect, pay for that learning opportunity that SDG&E has
I don't think we should try to confuse the facts here, okay? SDG&E has done its darndest to try to get as much wildfire or liability insurance. It was difficult after the 2003 fires, but we managed to get $1.1 billion, which we thought was adequate in 2007. I don't think anybody would have expected we'd see another conflagration like we saw in 2003, 4 years later. So we have liability insurance in place today that we had to scour the globe for, but we've just got $1 billion. The interesting thing is that if we had had enough, if it was available, we would have had it, but we didn't think we needed it at that time. But even so, those costs would have been borne by our customers. That's a cost of doing business, getting liability insurance. So it follows that this is basically what is not covered by insurance is a cost of doing business. When you figure that what happened during the obligation to fulfill our delivery of service to all customers was part of doing business, that is why the courts and the Commission have found that those are appropriate costs to be picked up by the customers.
I think some people will argue, though, if there's no financial penalty or consequence to the utility company, if it gets passed on to the ratepayer, what will motivate the utility company to make sure it does its best to not, cause fire in the future?
I don't think it's a financial motivation. If you know anybody at SDG&E, you know how seriously we take our responsibility of providing safe, reliable service. And remember, the people at SDG&E are the ones who really get the job done. So when you think about SDG&E, think about the people who come out in the middle of the night to fix your power, to come out to make sure that your gas appliances are safe, who do all of this regardless of what the weather is like, although it's not so bad in San Diego, obviously. Frankly, in one of our proposals, we are proposing a sharing of costs between customers and shareholders, but we feel very comfortable that and very proud of the effort that we have made to strengthen our system, to keep our system strong, and to protect our customers from anything that could go wrong in the future. We hope. We can't predict the future, obviously, but we're doing our best.
We haven't got a lot of time, but you mentioned sort of sharing in this cost, and I think people at home just have a sense of, is this fair? And if the utility right now, the way it stands, they're asking for the mechanism, this account that would allow it to pass this cost on to people. If the utilities, in a sense of fairness says, look, we know that maybe we ought to, our shareholders, this is a for-profit company, absorb some of this cost, and maybe we don't pass it all on to you. Do you think that the utility might be seen differently, from the public's point of view?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that the people get their information from the news, and I'm not entirely convinced that our story has really been getting out there, which is why I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to kind of try to set the record straight on a couple of things. I think that it's difficult for customers to understand, and I understand their anger and their frustration. Their feeling that there's a lack of fairness in all of this, but I think you also have to understand what the regulatory compact is, if you will, what the agreement is. SDG&E serves everybody, regardless of the potential risk that might pose to our equipment and to our communities. And the other side of that is, as a result, there are costs that are borne by shareholders, or excuse me, by customers, such as the cost of liability insurance, and in this case, the cost of the lack of liability insurance, but needing to put our system back together and also to provide the damages to those people who lost homes, et cetera.
Stephanie Donovan, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being here. Later in the show, I'll be speaking with David Peffer, lead wildfire attorney for the Utility Consumer Action Network.